Hello. Welcome to this week's vlog. It's a little bit different. The video quality is going to be different. The sound quality is going to be different. It's an entirely different format. But, earlier this week, I was doing a stream. By the way, subscribe to my Twitch channel or follow it to do something. Go to my Twitch channel. And while that stream was happening, the subject of A Quiet Place got brought up. And I have opinions on A Quiet Place. And so does my community, apparently. So, this week we are going to do a little bit of a dive into A Quiet Place and why it's just okay. Just fair warning, there are going to be big ol' spoilers in this. The entire video is just spoilers for A Quiet Place. So if you haven't seen it and you're interested in seeing it, don't watch this video. If you want to continue to support me, just mute the tab in the background and have it play or something. I don't know. What we're gonna do is we're gonna do just a real quick rundown of the movie for anybody who isn't familiar but is still sticking around. And then we're gonna break it down a little bit into sections and specific themes and parts of the movie. To start with, it's a movie about this family. Something happened. It doesn't explain it in the first movie. I've seen the second one, but we're not going into the second movie here. And basically, we start off this family scavenging for some stuff in a convenience store type place, drugstore, whatever you want to call it. And as they are walking home, they get attacked by this monster because their son is brilliant. We're going to go into all of this. And their son dies. Then fast forward a bit. They're living, they're doing their thing, they're being a family, not necessarily the most functional family, but a family. The wife is pregnant, the other two kids are still around doing their thing, the dad's being a dad, and more or less their living space and situation comes under attack by these monsters. That's about it. That's really all that happens. We're gonna go into specifics of things, so I don't want to give you too much of an in-depth look into the movie because we're going to do that and I don't want to double up on all of that for you. So just getting into things, we're gonna start with everything prior to the title card and discussing that a bit, and then we're gonna go into just more of the fine details of things. So the movie starts 3 months after first contact with whatever these monsters are. And I'm looking at a lot of this through the lens of we are 3 months into this. We've seen people dying all around us. We've seen news reports. We have information. We've been collecting data on what's going on in our specific area. This family should have a routine. They should understand what they're doing. So that's where we're coming at with this. It's 3 months. That's more than enough time to figure things out. So we start off, we're in this drugstore, and this little kid is running around, and its feet are slapping the floor so hard. It is a notable noise, and we're gonna get into this later, but personally, it's a noise that I feel should be too loud for the parameters of what we're to believe of this universe. Then, they're going through, they're doing their thing. The little kid goes to grab a plastic space shuttle because he thinks that a space shuttle is going to take his family away from all the bad things. He starts to drop it because he's small and it's up on a shelf, and his sister just comes sliding in on her knees. Now, as it's falling, the space shuttle hits the shelf, which would make noise. Her hitting the ground to slide would make noise. As somebody who drops onto the ground sometimes, hello, Bolt. I've fallen a few times in my life. It makes noise. It's not a quiet thing. It's not a gentle thing. So again, noise. Notable noise. Substantial noise. Right here in the beginning. The kid wants this space shuttle. So the family's getting ready to leave this store, and the kid walks up with the space shuttle, and the dad just grabs it from him and is just like, no, we can't have this. It makes too much noise. As he pulls batteries out of it. But the thing is, right, In a logical situation, you've been at this 3 months, your kids are absolutely miserable. Just take the batteries out and give your kid the toy that doesn't have batteries in it. Like, that's literally all that the dad needed to do. He could have pocketed the batteries. They maybe needed to power something back at the house that those batteries could have been useful for. But no, instead, he takes the batteries out of the toy, sets the batteries on the counter, sets the toy on the counter. So, as they're leaving, the sister, feeling for her little brother, goes and grabs the toy and gives it to the kid. What the dad should have done, except that the batteries are still on the counter, and the kid grabs them when the sister turns her back. And this is where the biggest issue comes in for me, is, like I said, we're 3 months in. We should have procedure. We should be caring about, like, the children. We should be, we should be doing things smart. Instead of this small child staying with the parents, being put at the front of the pack, even just being put in the middle of the pack, this child is left to leave the store last. Now, toy aside, right? Ignoring the fact that the kid has a noisemaker. What if the kid falls? What if the kid trips on something? What if the kid accidentally kicks a rock? Like, this is a child that doesn't have full control over its motor movement. It is still young, and we're just leaving it to its own devices because we just are. That's my biggest issue with this entire movie, is that the choices that are made, nobody had to die in this movie. Literally not a single person had to die in this movie. It could have still been a compelling movie, even without the people dying. But people died because of stupid decisions that shouldn't have been stupid decisions, because they've been in the trenches long enough. But yeah, as they're walking home, we see that they're walking on sand, presumably to soften the noise of their feet. Which, again, is an issue that I have, because sand isn't going to be more quiet than walking on pavement or dirt. Sand makes more noise than any other surface that they've walked on. It makes no sense. Other than, like, laying out the path home, there's no point in them walking on the sand. It raises their risk of everything. It makes more noise. It can hide more things that they could step on and hurt their feet, which would cause sudden noise because they would yell because they're hurt, as we'll get into later. It's terrible. It's awful. It's a bad idea. Anyways, they're walking on the sand. The kid's in the back. The monster comes up. Everybody is all like, oh no! And it's dumb because it didn't need to happen. So we get past the title card, and it tells us that we are 472 days from first contact. We're going through, seeing just the daily life of the family. They're operating surprisingly well for having a child been murdered about a year ago. And then to get into our first big thing that I want to address. The mother's pregnant. As we go through, like, their daily life and everything, we see her at a calendar. Like, she's taking track of her blood pressure. She's making sure everything's good with the pregnancy. She marks the date on the calendar. And based on when she said her due date was, if we're just assuming a regular 40-week pregnancy, she is 37 weeks pregnant. What this means is that she got pregnant 17 weeks after the death of her son. It's roughly like 4.5 months. And there's a few issues here, right? In the sense of basic survival, you do not want a baby in an environment where you can't make noise. And if they were in a situation where, like, they had a more soundproof living space, which we're going to get into, it would be one thing. But they don't have that. They actively made the choice to bang, knowing that they were bringing a child into a situation where very realistically they were going to possibly lose another child or put themselves in extreme danger at the very least. So, we've got that to look at with the pregnancy, but then also 17 weeks. You just lost your son. Your children lost their brother. Everyone is still mourning. Like, I get it. Everybody deals with trauma in different ways, but they really, really, really needed to think this through. Like, you're raiding a drugstore that still has a supply of medication, which means that supplies overall aren't, like, that bare. Steal some condoms. If you really need to, like, bang out your bad feelings, wrap it before you tap it. We see throughout the movie that, literally in this opening section, we see that the father is still mourning. We see that the children are super messed up by this, and we're gonna go into that a bit. We're gonna talk about the children specifically. We also see that the mother is still mourning. Everybody is still in mourning by the time this baby is coming around. And yet, we decided that we were gonna make a baby anyways when it was way fresher. And it's just, I don't know. It bothers me. The writing of it bothers me. I can't see a situation where a father who is still blaming himself for his child's death and a mother who lost her youngest child, and everybody is dealing with these monsters potentially murdering them at any point. I can't see a situation where a baby happens. She goes into labor, and she goes into the basement of the house, which has zero soundproofing, and I just wonder, right, did they have any sort of pregnancy plan? Because in the other house, in like the barn or whatever, because they're on a big farm area, there's a sort of soundproofed place. Sort of. Again, we're going to get into it later. And that's where the dad takes her after she gives birth. But she was still on her feet and moving around prior to giving birth. She could have walked to this barn farm thing on her own. When she is at this other basement area, right, it starts to flood. There's this whole moment where she wakes up and everything's flooded. The father was out picking up or trying to find the children. And suddenly the box that they had to stick the baby in, because they had to soundproof the baby, it doesn't have a lid. And there's no explanation of why it doesn't have a lid. Because the box is floating, right? But there's no water inside the box. The box never tipped over because the baby is still in it. It was a heavy lid. There's no reason that the box floating should have caused that lid to fall off anywhere. But yeah, that's the whole pregnancy and baby thing has a lot of holes in it, and honestly was just there to add another component to the story that I think they could have done without. I think they could have written it differently without the baby, and it still could have been compelling, and we maybe could have had like better story arcs for the characters that were there, because as we're gonna get into, there's some issues. Before we get into stuff with the family, I want to touch on just a few things around the house, because we already talked about the situation with the soundproofing in the barn and all of that. First off, the stairs to the basement in the main house are inconsistently painted. In some scenes, they're painted, they have very clear, like, step marks where you put your feet as you're going down to make sure the stairs don't creak. In some scenes, they don't. Just a real quick moment of inconsistency in the movie that really, really bothered me. There's a scene where the daughter is walking into the house, and she's walking on tiptoe, which probably not necessary, but sure, I understand. and she's going from painted spot to painted spot. These spots are presumably painted there to avoid creaky spots in the floor. First off, why are you in such a creaky house? They were in the downtown area. It didn't look like anybody else was there. There were like apartments over the drugstores and stuff. I personally would have gone with the more modern amenities. If you weren't in the forest, there wasn't like wood cover for the monsters to attack. They could have set up a rooftop garden or something. They could have found ways around the issues that they ran into. Except that, so they're on a farm, right? And they have all of these fields, and you're just like, oh, hey, they're probably growing food for themselves. But it looks like all they're growing is corn. I don't know. There's some holes in their living situation. Where are they getting other vegetables from if all they're growing on the farm is corn? I don't know. Why would you not use that space for other vegetables? You know, how are they tilling the fields? Because the fields were perfectly tilled and everything was perfectly laid out. And this was more than a year in. And they're in upstate New York, which means that a winter happened. So that farm wasn't set up for them. It's not like they found a farm that was set up and that's just where they were. No, that's not how it works. But yeah, I feel like finding a bit more modern of a space that's not a big old creaky farmhouse would have been a bit more in their interest. Find a frickin' mansion. You're in upstate New York. They exist. Something with marble floors and a big backyard, you know? Like, there were better options. But yeah, back to the daughter walking through the house. She takes these giant steps. And I understand that old houses can be creaky, but you cannot tell me that they couldn't lay out the footsteps better to accommodate their children. Because the son is shorter than the daughter. He's got shorter legs. He's going to struggle even more walking through the house. What is happening? Why is this a thing? Why? You're literally setting your children up for failure. And along the lines of setting your children up for failure, the daughter is walking to the basement and she's about to go downstairs and the father stops her and is just like, no, you can't. All that we've really seen in the basement is radio equipment and food supplies. The daughter is deaf. She's not stupid. She's not, like, incapable of learning things. She's just deaf. And they speak fluent sign, like, throughout the entire movie. They're using sign language. So, why does the father not just be like, hey, I'm gonna teach you about these things, never touch them, because you could get us killed. Instead of being like, no, never go in the basement, it's a bad spot, it's evil and bad things are gonna happen. Like, you don't set yourself up for success in a situation by not teaching the people around you. And on that note, we're gonna get into some of the stuff with the family. Now, the daughter has a lot of trauma related to the death of her brother. Understandable. And because of this, she thinks that her dad hates her. She thinks her dad blames her for everything that happened with the son dying. Again, understandable. We see an example of that when the mother just asked the daughter to tell her dad that dinner is ready, and the daughter just doesn't want to even go and do that. It's been a year. You were cognizant enough of your situation to go and have a baby, or make a baby. Why could you not take 2 seconds at some point in this year to sit down with your daughter and be like, hey, I recognize that this has been rough for you. It's rough for me too. I don't blame you. Instead, when it comes time to go and collect the fish, the father, instead of taking the daughter, who is more than willing to go, and is less of a liability, as we're going to get into. He decides to take the son, who absolutely does not want to go. He's terrified to go. He has presumably trauma over his brother dying. He just is scared, but for some reason. The father, who literally sits down with his son, and when his son asks him,
do you blame him for what happened?
He's just like, no. The dad makes a comment to the mother about how she'll take her next time. This implies that the mother and father have talked about this before. But the mother doesn't seem to step in still and say anything. So, who knows what's going on there. The mother has her own thing going on, which we'll talk about. But the father and the son go off and do this thing. And this is just the beginning of, like, a line of examples of why the son is a liability. In the moment that the fish flops out of his hand, and the kid is ready to run. His fight or flight kicks in, and he is just, bam, he is out of here, he is gone. And the dad stops him and explains to him, like, if there's a large sound, then small sounds are okay. Which we're gonna get back to in a little bit. As the son and the father are walking back from getting the fish, they stop and they are passing by a house. They come across this old man who presumably has, like, murdered his wife or something. It's unclear. We think he murdered her. She might have been murdered by the monsters. Who knows? And the dad, for some reason, and this is a huge issue that I have, the dad stops and just stares at this guy for a while. And instead of moving on with the kid and continuing to move, the dad's just like, shh, and stands there with his child while this guy just revs himself up and gets ready to scream. The dad grabs the kid and runs back and hides behind a tree. And the second that this kid hears this monster, he starts panicking. You can tell that he is about to scream. And this situation, this one super specifically, is why I'm just like, why didn't you just take the daughter? Like, there's nothing that they did other than yelling at a waterfall, which we're going to talk about later. There's nothing that they did that she would have been more of a liability on. If anything, she would have been less of a liability because she wasn't going to panic about the sound of the fish flopping on the rocks. She doesn't even know if fish make sounds when they're flopping on rocks or if it's a loud sound or anything like that. She wasn't going to panic when the monster was attacking because she couldn't hear it. She wouldn't know when it attacked. It would have just been there. And then there's another situation at the end where the kid is in the field and he got separated from his dad because they had to go set off fireworks to try and draw the monsters away from his mom. The whole thing. And the kid hears monsters in the area, and instead of just holding still or, like, calmly walking, he takes off running. Again, fight or flight. Has learned nothing throughout this entire movie, has not taken notes from his brother dying or from his dad being like, hey, be chill, or anything like that. He just takes off and he runs into the wheel of a tractor. And in that moment, this family should have had a second child dead. The only child that didn't make a huge noise, though there are some issues that we're going to get into with the daughter. The only child that didn't make a huge noise was the daughter. But no, we can't take her on this trip and maybe help some of her trauma and bond with her and help her move past the death of her brother. Why would we? That's that whole thing. The son is honestly, he's a good kid. He's very emotionally in tune. He gets on his dad about, you know, his sister blaming herself for their brother's death. And that's all fine. The father doesn't seem to really I feel like he had to have known that beforehand, but it is what it is. Rewinding a bit to the sister, right? So, she goes up to her room and she's upset. She throws something onto her bed. It makes a bit of noise. We'll pretend that it's a quiet enough noise. And then she takes the hearing aid. Her dad made her a hearing aid because he's been trying to make her a hearing aid that will actually work for her. So she takes this hearing aid, she puts it on to see if it works. It doesn't. But in testing it, she snaps. Now, you guys just heard the sound of a snap. I wouldn't call that a small noise. And in this instance, it is the one time that I'm just like, okay, her being deaf is an issue because she can't hear. That was a bad snap. She can't hear how loud that is. And if they can't even speak at regular volume, we can assume that the decibel level that is too high is at least like inside voice volume, which I can't snap anymore. But if I look at my meter here as I'm recording, the sound of my snaps are as loud as the sound of my voice. So that would presumably have drawn the monsters in. Sound inconsistencies are a thing in this movie, and we are going to get into that as soon as we're done talking about this family. So she snaps, it upsets her that she can't hear, she leaves. The mother is just in the house doing laundry. She grabs the bag of clothes to go upstairs, and she's walking up the stairs, and the bag gets snagged on a nail on the stairs. Why? In what situation does it make sense for her to continue pulling this bag that is stuck? There's no logical reason for her to just keep pulling on it. I don't care that she's pregnant. I don't care that she's stressed. I don't care about any of that. You are in a situation where anything making noise potentially murders you. And yet she's sitting here just yanking on this bag that is stuck on this nail. Either the bag is going to rip and it's going to make noise, you're going to pull up whatever is attached to that bag and it's going to make noise, or what happens and she falls forward onto the stairs, which, again, as somebody who falls a lot, I have fallen upstairs. It is not quiet. I don't care if you catch yourself. You are still making a thud when you hit those stairs. But ignoring that inconsistency in sound and the choice that they made in the sound engineering to make that not be a notable sound, she goes outside, she hangs up the laundry. Still hasn't, addressed the fact that her daughter was left behind to help her with stuff. She goes upstairs. She goes and walks past her daughter's room. She looks into her daughter's room. Would not have seen her daughter there. Would have been like, hey, maybe I should be worried about my deaf daughter who's not in the house and wasn't helping me with the things she was supposed to be helping me with. But no, instead, she goes and she sits in her dead child's room. And she stays there until nightfall. An entire day. She didn't check in on her daughter. She didn't check in on her daughter, who was clearly emotionally distressed because her father was putting her to the side. She didn't check in on her daughter, who has mountain of trauma from everything that's happened. No, instead she just goes and sits in her dead child's room and then gets up and goes into labor and doesn't go to the place that's soundproof to give birth. Doesn't look for her daughter to help her, the one person that is supposed to be in the house. Doesn't try and find her daughter in her room. Just goes down into the entirely unsoundproof basement and steps on this nail and screams and draws in the monsters. And it's a bad moment in the writing for me. Because it doesn't make sense. It literally exists just to provide a point of contention in the story. Like, they imply that she's going to the basement to turn on the lights to signal that there's an issue at the house and her husband needs to come back home. But she still could have looked for her daughter. She could have done a lot of things. She was kind of rushing down the stairs, but not enough that she couldn't have taken a moment as she was putting her foot down to feel a nail stabbing into it and stop before the nail is entirely embedded. It's just, overall, it was a moment that I really, really hated in the movie. Because it was just a lot of things put together without any sort of real logic behind it. Speaking about logic, we're going to get into the big part of this right now, which is the sound and how sound works in this universe and the sound design and all of that. The beginning of the movie, right? The child makes a noise. The monster, alien, whatever it is, comes charging right at the kid. There's no stopping it. It knows the exact location where the child is. But for some reason, throughout the rest of the movie, it really varies whether or not they know the exact location of the sound. So, like, at one point, the children are playing Monopoly, and they're getting a little goofy, and they knock over a lantern. It makes a big crash noise. There's obviously fire. They have to stomp out the fire. It makes a bunch of noise. They're listening to see if the monsters are coming, and they hear a noise on the roof that's louder than the lantern was. All of a sudden, it's just a couple of cute little goofy raccoons that drop onto the ground. Those raccoons go on their merry little way. One of them gets grabbed by a monster. But unlike the instance with the sun dying, the monster doesn't come directly to them. It didn't run up to the source of the sound. It seems like it's just lurking in the cornfield waiting for something to come along, because it just reaches out and grabs the raccoon. So that's just sort of the first instance of, like, okay, do the monsters come directly to sound, or do they just hang out? What's the deal here? Again, as we talked about, the daughter snaps, the monsters don't hear it. The dad specifically tells the son, small sounds are safe as long as there is a big sound nearby. But that doesn't mean that all small sounds are safe. Like, the sound of footsteps, we've gathered, is presumably safe because they're walking everywhere and they're not being attacked. But just what is the decibel level? And when they're sitting there at the waterfall, the dad and the boy yell because the sound of the waterfall and river supposedly are going to drown it out. But their voices carry over the sound of the water. And you have a highly advanced apex predator whose entire hunting method is based on sound. And you're trying to tell me that it's not going to pick up this loud yell over the sound of the water. It's not going to notice that difference in sound and go to check it out. That's what you're trying to tell me. I don't buy it. I think that it is another weak point in the writing. It's a weak point in the design of the monsters. Like, that entire moment, okay, yeah, sure, the kid's voice got drowned out by the waterfall. The dad was loud. It doesn't make sense. And the issue with the monsters coming directly to the sound happens again with the old man yelling as the dad and the son are walking past. The monster doesn't hesitate. It doesn't go looking around the area. It goes right to the sound and just chomp. Man's dead. That's it. And the monster just takes off back into the woods. So, one, that tells us that these monsters are one and dones. They attack, they take their prey, and they leave. Except that they don't. Sometimes they hunt. Like in the situation when the mom steps on the nail and screams and draws the monsters into the house. Like, she takes an audible step on the stairs when the monster is already in the house. It is at the top of the stairs. And yet, somehow, this predator, who can hear over maybe even miles, when it is actively hunting, doesn't hear her footsteps? How does that make sense? She's standing basically right next to it. She also doesn't pay attention when she's going back up the stairs, even though, you know, there's a big old nail sticking out of the stairs and that's the whole thing, but it is what it is. She also was breathing so heavily, and the monster, at one point she sets a kitchen timer to try and draw its attention. And as it's listening, it hones in on the sound of the ticking. This monster has been hunting for a while. At some point, would it not have honed in on the sound of her breathing and been able to recognize the sound of breathing as, you know, something that it can attack and eat? Am I wrong in this line of thinking? It's a predator. It's gonna understand what its prey sounds like. Maybe that's just my opinion, but yeah. The dad and the son come back. She's in the bathtub giving birth. And they start setting off fireworks. Mind you, the monsters are still in the house. The fireworks are going off. She's pushing the baby out. She screams at the top of her lungs. Like, everything in her goes into this scream. It is at a moment of complete silence. It is between firework blasts. And yet, it doesn't pull the monsters back into the bathroom where she is. Why? Why is that a thing? Can somebody explain to me? Because I don't know. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't... They would hear the screaming. They would recognize that as part of their prey. Because again, these are predators. They know what humans sound like at this point. They've eaten enough of them. Why would they not come back? So they go through all that. At one point, the mother is hiding in the shower. I don't know why she moved to the shower from the bathtub, but she's in the shower, and the dad is sitting there thinking she's dead, and she hits the shower door. Instead of just, quietly opening the shower door so that he sees her or anything like that, she just slams her hand against the shower door. And again, there's still monsters on the property. There's not much else going on at this moment. Why did that not draw them in? It was a pretty notable noise, and they were actively hunting. So the dad finds her, takes her to the barn, and they go downstairs. The baby's crying. The baby starts crying, as they step into the barn, and the father's like, oh, we need to get going. And he goes, and he moves, and he has this, hole in the floor covered by a mattress, more or less, that takes them down to the basement. And as they go down there, he covers them up with the mattress. The baby is still crying. You can hear the monster moving around upstairs. You can also see that the ceiling isn't insulated in any way. Any content creator, any streamer will let you know. Mattresses are great for sound dampening. They do not soundproof an area, especially not an area that is otherwise uninsulated and just wide open. The monster would have heard them. The monster would have been able to find where they were. And presumably could have torn through the floor if it really wanted to, based on what we see of the monsters in this movie and the next one. They're not weak little things, you know? They can tear stuff apart. But somehow, some way, the monster just doesn't hear the baby crying, or it's quiet enough that it doesn't bother the monster, or who knows. So we go back outside. The son is out in the field. Like I said, he just starts running. And he hits this tractor. And again, that is the moment he would have been dead. The monsters were already out in the field. They were already on the hunt. They would have heard that thud, and that would have been it. And then we have the daughter, who is being quiet, and yet for some reason there's still a monster stalking her. Unsure why, unless they do follow footsteps, in which case we've got a lot of other issues going on here. But the monster is stalking her. It looks like it's about to attack her, even though she's not really making noise. And all of a sudden, as it starts listening, the feedback starts in her hearing aid. We assume that the feedback started when it started listening because it's using some sort of like echolocation or something along those lines that is triggering something in the hearing aid and causing this feedback. It's basically radio interference. But it stops listening and the feedback continues. And then later on she sees another monster and the feedback starts before the monster starts listening. It's unclear what is causing this feedback. The monsters do seem to have some sort of effect on lights, like there's some flickering lights when they show up in the basement, and it causes like the flashlight to flicker, so they might emit some sort of like electromagnetic field or something that's causing this feedback, but it's not explained and it's not consistent that this feedback is happening just from their presence or from them listening in and trying to hone in on her. And then we go back to the house. The dad leaves to go try and find the children. And there is water pouring in. This isn't a small little trickle of water. This is water literally pouring into the barn. Somehow, he didn't hear this. As far as we know, the dad doesn't have any hearing issues. And in this situation, especially when he knew that there had been a monster upstairs walking around, you would be alert. You would be listening for any sort of movement, anything going on. He just walks out of this barn, not hearing the gushing water coming out of the wall or whatever it's coming from. This water starts to fill up the basement. Somehow the mom is sleeping through this. I understand she just had a baby, but like, it's a lot of water and it's dripping from the ceiling and the baby is floating away with the lid not on top of its box for some reason. Again, who knows why. And there's a literal like waterfall in one portion of the room that eventually she steps behind to try and hide from the monster. Presumably to hide the sound of her breathing or heartbeat or anything else, which again, is that a thing that the monsters are following? Because it's unclear, but she goes behind this little like waterfall. And at that moment, the son falls into the silo. It opens up the doors, they just sort of like swing open and he falls in. I personally, this moment bothered me. I don't think that those silo doors were louder than this water rushing into the house. But apparently it was enough to draw the monster out to the silo. But yeah, all that happens. And the dad finds the kids. They're all together. The dad goes to check things out. He's making no noise. The children are making no noise. And yet, the dad steps under this little, like, I don't even know what it is. He steps under it, and the monster attacks him. How? Where did the monster get this information from? How did it know that he was there? How did it launch this attack? Why? Did it hear his footsteps suddenly? Because the mom was walking around the basement slushing water around and the monster didn't attack her there. Did it hear his breathing? Did it hear his heartbeat? Because again, all of those things, the monster should have killed the mom earlier. But instead, the dad gets swiped for no reason. So, like, he gets swiped. The kids are hiding in the car. The monster starts attacking the car. But the kids are silent in there. They're moving around a little bit, but they're not making any major noise, which, again, small noises are okay. And the dad drops his axe to the side to draw the monster's attention because it's actually noise instead of the no noise that is coming from the truck. And this moment is the moment that bothered me the most because he could have taken that axe. He could have chucked it into the cornfield. He could have gone and grabbed something else somewhere and chucked it somewhere just enough to make a noise far away that the monster would go investigate. Because the sound of the axe dropping was enough for the monster to be distracted from trying to attack the kids. Something further away, even if it wasn't a gigantic noise, could have still drawn that monster's attention. And at that moment, the dad could have made his way to the car, hopped in, and kicked it into neutral or whatever they did to slide down the hill. But no, instead, dad dies. Because he screams to draw the monster onto him, and it's dumb. And it's the worst moment in the entire movie. They use it as a moment for the father to, like, finally more or less make it up to his daughter that he's been a dick all this time. But, you know, you could have just had a moment where they worked together or he brought her into the... Like, it... He didn't have to die. That's all there is to it. But going back to the car, that car hasn't moved in over a year. Minimum. Assuming that it wasn't just like a farmer's truck that was just sitting there in the field unused for God knows how long. The second it started moving, it would have started creaking. And especially when they got down to the house and hit the brakes, those brakes are squealing. There is no way that that car is not making noise that is going to draw the monsters to it. And there's 3 monsters in this area, by the way. So even if the one that is eating the dad continues eating the dad, the other 2 are going to run in to eat the children in this noisy car. That's all there is to it. But for some reason they don't. And the kids go inside the house with their mom. All of a sudden, monster comes in the house. And they're all worried and whatever, and the daughter looks over and sees that her dad realized that the monsters have a weakness, and she's just like, oh, all those times I heard stuff, and the monsters were there, it wasn't a coincidence, I'm their weakness. And so she takes and she turns her hearing aid back on. But instead of taking it off of her ear, she just leaves it on her ear and is just like doubled over in pain from the sound of this feedback just being pumped into her brain. And it's just like, why would you not take it off first? Like, why was this your line of thought? But she takes it, and eventually she takes it off and holds it up to a microphone to create more feedback to blast the monster back because the baby starts crying. And so this feedback blasts the monster back. And in this moment, all I could think was that that baby now has severe hearing damage. They now have a second child who is probably legally deaf. That's that. There's a lot of inconsistencies in how the sound works and how the monsters react to it and how it's used. And I don't know, it just really, really, really bothered me. But just to wrap all of this up, the thing that bothered me the most was that literally they could have taken out the monsters from the get-go. After the daughter blasts this monster back with her feedback loop, it gets back up and it is ready to attack them. And the mom just takes the shotgun and pow, right in the face of the monster. They could have done that the whole time. And before you're just like, oh, but Polar, it would make noise, the monsters would come. They know that there are 3 monsters in this area. They could shoot 3 monsters in the face. Like, it's not like the monsters have been hunting in a pack or anything. They're coming one by one for the most part. And it just really, really, really bothered me that, you know, there was never a moment of like, hey, yeah, no, we're just gonna shoot them. We're in America. Like, I know that plenty of people in this town had guns. The military could have figured this out relatively early on, but no, instead we just have monsters roaming around that die from a single shot to the face. It's not even like it took multiple shots. 1 shot to the face, and this monster was dead. And then they had plenty of time to wait for the next monster to come around. I don't know. The movie wasn't bad. The concept was good. I liked that it was something different. I liked their use of sound, even though the way that it was applied was inconsistent. And the sound engineering downplayed a lot of sound just for the sake of making sure that the plot worked. But overall, the movie was just okay. And that's all that I've got, is that it was just okay. It wasn't a bad movie. It just wasn't good. On that note, this is going to be a very long video, so thank you if you stuck around for the whole thing. If you want to see more movie analysis sort of stuff, let me know. I don't mind doing this stuff. Like, anytime that I watch a movie, I am very heavily analyzing it. So, you know, this is something that we could incorporate somewhere, maybe. Yeah, if you disagree with any of the points that I made, let me know down below in the comments, and I will continue to tell you why you're wrong. But yeah, that's going to be it for this week. I will see you guys next Sunday for a more normal vlog. We're going to the auto show. It's going to be all auto-y. I'll see you all next Sunday. Bye!